Under the paling light of dawn, the earth was still damp from the night's dew. The woman knelt in the half-dug grave, her hands raw and trembling as she pushed the last shovelfuls of dirt over the rough pine box. Her breath came in ragged bursts, clouding in the chill air. She did not cry. There were no tears left in her body. The grief sat heavier than the soul she packed down, pressing on her chest until she thought it might crush her. Beside her stood her young son, clutching the frayed hem of her dress with dirt-streaked fingers. His face was pale, eyes too wide for a boy so small. He didn't speak. Perhaps he didn't know what words to say, or perhaps he feared that if he opened his mouth, the last fragile thread holding them together would snap. The world felt unnaturally quiet. No bird song, no rustle of leaves. Even the wind had stilled, as if the land itself mourned with her. The cottonwood tree above the gray bent slightly eastward, its branches swaying ever so faintly. It was the same tree under which her husband had once carved their initials years ago, when they'd first settled this lonely stretch of prairie. Now it marked his resting place. She pressed her palm to the freshly packed earth. The dirt was cold and yielding. In her mind, she still felt the weight of his body. When she dragged him from where he'd fallen, she still heard the gunshot, sharp and final, that had torn through the morning hours before. They had come at first light traders from the neighboring tribe, men who once traded furs with her husband, men who had grown hostile as land disputes turned to blood. He had tried to defend their home. He had not survived the attempt. Her son whimpered, a soft sound that broke the stillness. She drew him close, wrapping her arms around his thin shoulders. The child buried his face against her skirt, and she smoothed his hair with a hand that shook despite her effort to appear strong. She wanted to whisper that everything would be all right, that they were safe now, but the lie stuck in her throat. She looked toward the cabin, its door hanging crooked from its hinges, the inside ransacked and stripped bare. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The life they had built plank by plank was gone. She felt the weight of that loss pressing down on her as sharply as the grief for her husband. But she could not sit here and weep, not with her boy to protect, not with the dawn so new and the world so uncertain. She knew the raiders could return at any moment. They had taken what they wanted, but greed and hatred often came back for more. She had seen what men became when vengeance soured in their blood. She rose to her feet, her skirts heavy with mud, her fingers blistered from the shovel. The grave looked too small, too lonely for the man who had once filled every corner of her life with his laughter and stubborn kindness. She placed a simple wooden cross at the head of the mound, carved hastily the night before. She knew where her husband lay. That would be enough. The boy tugged at her sleeve. She looked down into his face, his lip trembling. He was too young to understand fully, but old enough to know that something irrevocable had changed. She knelt before him, resting her hands on his small shoulders. "We have to be brave now," she whispered. Her voice was low, steady, though her insides churned. "Your father would want us to keep going." The boy nodded, though his eyes brimmed with confusion. He pressed his face into her neck, and she held him tightly, feeling the fragile warmth of him against her chest. It was that warmth, more than anything, that forced her to stand again, to square her shoulders, to take one last look at the grave before turning away She led the boy back toward the cabin. The wind ticked up then, a faint stirring that carried with it the scent of smoke, distant, but not distant enough. She froze, her senses sharpening. On the horizon, faint shapes were moving, silhouettes against the rising sun. Horses, men astride them, riding fast. Her heart lurched. For one foolish second she thought they might be settlers. Neighbors came to offer help, but she knew better. The sun glinted off spear tips and rifles. Even from this distance she could see the paint streaked across their faces. The war party was coming back. Panic surged out, and bitter in her chest, she grabbed her son's hand, pulling him into the cabin. The boy stumbled but kept pace, sensing the danger even if he didn't understand its full meaning. Inside, she slammed the door shut and shoved the heavy bar across it. Her eyes swept the single-room home, landing on the rifle propped against the wall. Her husband's rifle, the last weapon they had. She snatched it up, feeling its weight, praying it would be enough. The boy stood near the hearth, silent, eyes wide as he clutched the ragged doll his father had whittled for him last winter. She wanted to tell him to hide, to stay out of sight, but there was nowhere to hide. The cabin was too small, too exposed. There would be no easy escape. Her breath came faster as she checked the rifle's chamber. One bullet, one chance. Her fingers trembled as she loaded it, as she forced herself to breathe, to think. She could not waste the shot, and even if she didn't, there were too many of them. The sound of hooves grew louder, a thunder rolling closer with every heartbeat. She could hear them shouting now, their voices cutting through the morning air. The boy whimpered again, and she turned to him, crouching so her face was level with his. No matter what happens, she said softly, you stay behind me. Understand? He nodded, tears streaking his dirty cheeks. She kissed his forehead, then rose, rifle in hand, and moved to the window. The riders were closer now, their faces fierce and painted, their horses kicking up dust. She swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the gunstock. She thought of her husband, how he had stood in this very doorway hours earlier, determined to protect his family. She thought of how quickly he had fallen. A wave of despair threatened to break over her, but she shoved it down. She had no room left for despair, only for resolve. The first rider broke ahead of the group, spear raised. The woman took aim, her eyes steady despite the tremor in her hands. She drew a breath, slow and deep, and waited. The boy clung to her skirt, eyes fixed on the window. The hoofbeats roared in his ears. The woman's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. The shot rang out sharp and final, echoing across the open prairie. The lead rider jerked violently backward, his spear tumbling from his grasp as he crashed to the ground. The woman's shoulder slammed against the window frame from the recoil, but she didn't let go of the rifle. Smoke curled from the barrel, the scent of powder mingling with the cold morning air. For a heartbeat, there was silent shock rippling through the war party as they registered what had happened. Then came the roar, fierce and vengeful, as the remaining riders spurred their horses faster. Dust billowed behind them like a storm cloud. Her stomach twisted as she realized there was no time to reload. The single bullet had been spent. The rifle became dead weight in her hands. She set it aside, grabbing the small hatchet that leaned against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was all she had left. The boy stood frozen by the hearth, clutching his wooden doll to his chest. She forced her voice to be calm, steady. Get behind the table. Stay low. He obeyed, scrambling to crouch in the narrow space, his eyes wide with terror. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him she would protect him no matter what, but there was no time for comfort now. The pounding of hooves stopped abruptly. Outside, she could hear men dismounting, boots hitting the ground, weapons rattling. Harsh voices call to one another in a language she couldn't understand. The door shuddered as something slammed against it. Once, twice the wooden bar held, but she knew it wouldn't last. She backed up, hatchet grip tight, every muscle in her body taut. The third strike splintered the wood. A fourth broke it clean open. The door crashed inward, shards scattering across the floor. The first warrior through the doorway was young, his face streaked with red and black paint, his eyes burning with fury. He raised his knife as he stepped inside. With a cry torn from deep in her chest, she swung the hatchet. It connected with a sickening thud against his arm, and he stumbled back, howling in pain. Another man lunged in behind him, seizing her by the wrist. She struggled fiercely, clawing and kicking, her mind a blur of panic and rage. She twisted sharply, driving her knee into his stomach. He grunted and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench free, but there were more of them, too many. One caught her around the waist, dragging her back as she kicked and struck blindly. The hatchet slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. She screamed, fighting with everything she had. But he was stronger. Run, she cried to her son. Run. The boy scrambled out from behind a table, darting toward the back door. But one of the warriors moved quicker, seizing the child by the arm. The boy shrieked, kicking wildly. No, she screamed, her voice raw. She thrashed harder, but the man restraining her tightened his grip, pinning her arms. Another warrior stepped forward, his expression grim as he barked something in his native tongue. The others hesitated, looking toward him as if for instruction. The woman froze. She didn't understand the words, but something in his tone commanding, decisive, cut through the chaos. He stepped closer, studying her with eyes that held a strange familiarity. For a brief, bewildering moment, she thought she recognized him. His hair was longer now, streaked with wind and dust, and his face bore the paint of war, but there was no mistaking the scar across his brow. It struck her like a blow. She knew this man. He had been a friend to her husband years ago, back when peace still held between settler and tribe. He had eaten at their table once, traded pelts and stories by their fire. His name, yes, she remembered it now, was Tayanita. The warriors around them murmured, glancing at him uneasily. He barked another command, sharper this time. The man holding her released his grip. The boy was let go as well, stumbling back toward his mother. She snatched her son into her arms, holding him tightly. Tayanita looked at her, his expression unreadable. He spoke in halting English, his voice low and steady. You fight like he would. Her breath caught in her throat. Why are you here? He glanced at the other warriors who were still shifting restlessly. They came for blood, for land taken. I could not stop them. You're with them, she whispered bitterly. I was, he said, his eyes hardening. But he, your husband, he once spared my life when others would have taken it. I will not forget. The words struck her deeper than any blade. The warriors muttered again, clearly unhappy with the exchange. Tayanita turned sharply to them, his voice rising as he barked orders in his native tongue. Whatever he said, it silenced them for the moment, though their expressions remained tense. He faced her again, stepping closer, lowering his voice. They will not stop. They will kill you both. But I can help you escape. Her heart pounded. She didn't know if she could trust him. Yet the memory of her husband's kindness, how he had once stood up for Tayanita when no other settler would, burned bright in her mind. The boy clung to her skirt, his small fingers digging in. She looked down at him, then back at Tayanita. You'll risk your life for us? She asked. Yes, he said simply. For him, for you. The decision tore at her, but she nodded, gripping her son's hand tighter. Tayanita motioned for them to follow, then turned sharply to the other warriors, shouting another command. The men shifted, some snarling, some glaring, but none dared to move against him. He led her toward the back of the cabin, where the shadows stretched long against the earth. Stay close, he murmured, and do not look back. With her son in tow and her heart in her throat, she stepped into the pale morning light, following the man who was now their only hope. The cold air stung her cheeks as she stepped out into the open, her son clutching her hand so tightly his knuckles were white. Behind them, the warriors shifted restlessly, their painted faces lit by the rising sun. Some barked protest, set Tayanita, but his sharp commands kept them at bay. He moved quickly, keeping to the shadows along the side of the cabin. This way, he whispered, glancing back to ensure they followed. Her heart pounded in her ears, louder than the crunch of her boots in the frost-hardened earth. Every step felt too slow, too loud. She half expected to hear the shout of pursuit at any moment. Tayanita led them past the edge of the clearing, toward a narrow path cut between low shrubs and scattered rocks. The boy stumbled once, his small legs struggling to keep up. She scooped him into her arms without slowing, ignoring the sharp ache in her muscles. Where are you taking us? She asked in a breathless whisper. Old trail, Tayanita replied. Few know it now. It leads to a river. If we reach the trees, they will not find you. She nodded, though fear still gripped her. Each glance over her shoulder revealed the war party lingering near the cabin, some mounted again, some arguing among themselves. Their voices carried faintly on the wind, too far for her to hear the words, but close enough to send fresh terror through her veins. The narrow trail twisted through dry brush that snagged her skirt. Her breath came fast and shallow, her arms burning as she held her son close. The boy's head rested against her shoulder, his eyes squeezed shut. A hawk cried overhead, circling lazily in the brightening sky. The sound made her flinch, irrationally fearing would give away their position. At last, they reached a small stand of scrubby trees. Tayanita paused, scanning the horizon. His posture was tense, his hand never straying far from the hatchet at his side. They will follow, he said grimly, but not all. Some will stay to loot. We must move faster. He led them deeper into the trees, where the ground sloped gently downward. The air smelled of damp earth, a faint hint of water somewhere ahead. Hope flickered weakly in her chest. Perhaps they might truly make it. But then came the distant shouts. She froze, her stomach twisting. They've seen us, Tayanita said sharply. Run. She obeyed, clutching her son tightly as she stumbled after him. Branches whipped at her face, tearing her skin. Her lungs burned with the effort. Behind them came the pounding of hooves, growing louder with every heartbeat. Tayanita glanced back, his expression grim. Stay low, he barked, veering suddenly off the path and into the thicker brush. She followed, her skirt snagging on thorns. The boy whimpered softly, burying his face against her neck. Ahead, the trees thinned, revealing a narrow river cutting through the land. Its water shimmered in the sunlight, fast and cold. Without hesitation, Tayanita splashed into the shallows. Cross, he shouted. The icy water bit into her legs as she waded after him, holding her son high. The current tugged at her skirts, threatening to pull her down, but she fought against it, teeth chattering as she stumbled forward. On the far bank, Tayanita turned, hatchet in hand. "Go," he urged. Up the hill she scrambled up the embankment, slipping on the damp earth. Her son clung to her neck, his small frame trembling. A gunshot cracked behind them. She flinched, heart leaping into her throat. A bullet tore into the water near Tayanita. Spraying mist. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Tayanita dove behind a fallen log, signaling for her to keep going. She hesitated, torn between obeying and staying near him. "Go," he roared, his voice like a command that brooked no refusal. She turned and ran, half dragging her son up the slope. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion, but fear drove her onward. At the top of the hill, she collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. She pulled her son close, shielding him with her body as she looked back down. Tayanita moved swiftly between cover, staying low as he tried to draw the pursuer's fire away from her. He hurled his hatchet with deadly precision, striking one rider and sending him tumbling from his horse. But there were too many. Another rider charged across the river, his rifle raised. Tayanita seized the fallen man's spear, spinning just in time to deflect the blow. The two men grappled violently, their shouts carrying. Up the hill, the woman's heart was hammered. She wanted to help, to do something, but she had nothing, no weapon, no strength left. Then Tayanita drove the spear forward. The rider fell, his body splashing into the river. But victory was brief. Two more men surged forward, one with a tomahawk raised high. Tayanita fought like a man possessed, but he was only one against many. Her son whimpered softly, and she pressed a hand over his mouth, tears stinging her eyes. "Don't look," she whispered, voice shaking. The clash below grew fiercer, the sound of blade striking, bodies colliding. She forced herself to move, crawling backward over the crest of the hill, out of sight. Tayanita's single quote-sass voice rang out, harsh and desperate. "Run, go now." Every part of her wanted to stay, to see if he would survive, but she knew what her husband would have told her. Protect the boy out. So she rose, clutching her son, and fled into the dense woods beyond the hill. Branches tore at her arms as she stumbled forward. The forest swallowed her, its shadows deep and cool. Still she could hear the sounds of the fight. Behind her the roars, the gunshots, the final scream that cut through the air like a blade. And then silence. Her breath came ragged, her body trembling. She didn't dare stop. The boy's head pressed against her shoulder, his small arms wrapped around her neck. "Mama," he whispered, "hold on." She breathed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Just hold on." They disappeared deeper into the trees, leaving behind the river, the hill, and whatever fate had claimed the man who had risked everything to save them. The forest grew thicker as she pushed forward, the air damp and cool beneath the canopy. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her skirts were torn, her boots caked with mud, and her arms ached from carrying the boy. Still, she didn't stop. She could in single quotes. The boy clung to her, silent except for the soft sound of his breathing against her neck. She didn't know if he understood the danger or if fear had simply numbed him into stillness. Either way, she was grateful for his quiet. The woods swallowed sound, save for the occasional rustle of unseen creatures, but every crack of a branch or whisper of leaves made her heart leap, certain it was pursuit. She glanced back often, half expecting to see riders emerging from the shadows. There was nothing, no movement, no sound, only the lingering memory of that fight by the river, and the final cry that still echoed in her mind. Her throat tightened. She didn't know if Tayanita had survived. She didn't know if he'd bought them enough time or if the warriors were still hunting. But she kept moving, because stopping meant death after what felt like hours. She spotted a hollow at the base of an old oak. Hidden beneath a curtain of hanging moss, she slid down beside it, setting her son gently on the ground just for a moment. She whispered, her voice hoarse, the book hurled against her, small and shivering. She brushed the hair from his face, studying him for injuries. He was dirty, frightened, but unhurt. Relief washed over her, though it was fleeting. She pressed her forehead to her knees, letting herself breathe for the first time since dawn. Her hands shook uncontrollably, the weight of exhaustion and fear crashing down on her at once. But there was no time for grief, not yet. She forced herself to stand again, to listen for any sign of danger. The forest was still, perhaps to still. Stay close, she told her son, taking his hand. Once more they followed a faint game trail through the trees, the boy stumbling often. She slowed her pace, guiding him carefully. Each step forward felt like an eternity, but the growing murmur of running water ahead gave her hope. When they reached the stream, she knelt to let him drink, cupping water in her hands for him. The cold liquid was a small blessing, easing her parched throat as well. We'll follow the water, she murmured. It will lead us somewhere. The boy nodded, though his eyes were dull with fatigue. They walked along the stream's edge, the canopy thinning slightly to let pale sunlight filter through. At times she thought she heard movement far behind them, a faint snap of twigs, the soft whinny of a horse. But when she turned to look, there was only emptiness. Every sound became a threat, every shadow a possible enemy. Still, she pressed on. By mid-afternoon, her legs burned and her vision blurred with exhaustion. She stumbled often, nearly falling each time. Her body begged for rest, but the fear of being found drove her onward. Finally, the stream widened into a small clearing. A fallen tree stretched across the water, and beyond it she saw the faint outline of smoke rising above the treetops. Her breath caught. A settlement, a camp. She couldn't be sure. She crouched low, drawing the boy close. We have to be careful, she whispered. They crept forward, keeping to the cover of the trees. As they drew closer, voices drifted through the air, men speaking, women calling to one another. The cadence was familiar, accented like her own. It was a homestead, a few rough cabins stowed in, a clearing, chickens scratching at the dirt, and a man chopping wood near the edge of the forest. Relief and fear warred within her. Settlers could be salvation or suspicion. She stepped out cautiously, the boy clutching her skirt. The man with the axe turned, startled, his brow furrowed as he took in her torn clothes, mud-streaked face, and the terrified child at her side. Ma'am, he said slowly, her throat tightened. Please, she rasped, her voice raw. We need help. He dropped the axe at once, striding toward her. God above, What happened? Raiders? She whispered, my husband, he. Her voice broke, and she couldn't finish. The man's face hardened. Come inside. You're safe here. He guided her toward one of the cabins, calling out to someone inside. A woman appeared in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of them. Get her water, the man ordered, and blankets. The woman hurried away. Inside, the cabin was warm and dimly lit, the smell of stew lingering in the air. She sank onto a wooden bench, the bow pressed tightly against her side. The man crouched in front of her. Where did it happen? North, she said faintly, near the cottonwood grove. He cursed under his breath, shaking his head. You're lucky to be alive. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the forest loomed just beyond. She thought of Tayanita, of the blood shed by the river, of the choice he'd made to save her. Someone helped us, she murmured. The man looked at her curiously. A settler? She shook her head. No, one of them, but not like them, not anymore. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flashing in his expression, but he said nothing. The woman returned with blankets, draping one over her shoulders, another around the boy. Warmth seeped slowly into her frozen limbs. For the first time since dawn, she felt the smallest measure of safety, but the weight of all she'd lost and the debt she owed to the man who might have given his life pressed heavier than ever on her heart. That night, as she lay on a borrowed cot with her son sleeping beside her, she stared into the darkness, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She did not know if they were safe for good. She did not know if she could ever rebuild what had been taken, but she knew one thing with uncheckable certainty. She would not forget Tayanita's sacrifice. And if she lived, she would find a way to honor him. Morning light seeped through the cracks of the cabin walls, soft and golden. The boy stirred beside her, his small body curled under the blanket. She brushed a hand over his hair, feeling a pang of gratitude that he still breathed, that they had made it this far. But the moment she opened her eyes fully, the reality of everything crashed back. Her husband was gone, their home was gone, and Tayanita, she did not know if he had lived or died after sending her away. The settlers who had taken them and were kind but wary. The man from yesterday, whose name she learned was Samuel, offered her water and food. You can stay here for now, he said gruffly, but raiders might come this way again. We'll have to be ready. She nodded, though her voice failed her. Throughout the day, she helped where she could, fetching water, mending torn cloth, keeping her son close at all times. The small homestead bustled with quiet work, each person moving with the practiced efficiency of those who had long lived on the edge of danger. But every sound from the forest made her heart leap. Each distant crack of a branch sent her eyes to the window, expecting to see painted faces emerging from the trees. As night fell, she sat by the small hearth, the boy asleep in her lap. The fire's glow painted the walls in flickering gold, and for a brief moment the world felt almost safe. Samuel sat across from her, whittling a piece of wood with slow, deliberate strokes. Where will you go? He asked finally. She shook her head. I don't know. We built that cabin ourselves. It was everything we had. He studied her face, then looked away. Out here, you can't stay alone. You'll need people. Maybe stay with us through winter, at least. The offer warmed her, though she still felt adrift, as if the world she had known had been torn away in a single morning. That night she dreamed of her husband. In the dream, he was young again, smiling as he had in their first days together, splitting wood by the cottonwood tree. While she watched from the doorway, the dream twisted into the moment of his death, and she woke with a sharp gasp, clutching her son close. For days they stayed with Samuel and his family. Slowly the boy began to laugh again, timid and small at first, then fuller, as if he sensed that life still held some measure of safety. But her own heart remained restless. One evening she stood outside, staring toward the dark line of the forest. Samuel approached, setting down the axe he had been using. "You're thinking about going back," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "You want to know what became of him?" She nodded. Samuel sighed. "If he lived, he's long gone by now. And if he didn't, finish the thought. I owe him," she said softly. "He saved us. I can't just forget him." Samuel's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "Then I'll take you as far as the grove tomorrow, but only that far. I've got my own to protect." The next morning they set out, Samuel, and 2 other men from the settlement. The boy stayed behind, watched over by Samuel's wife. The land was eerily quiet as they neared the cottonwood grove. The ruins of her cabin stood stark against a pale sky, the door still hanging crook. Her breath caught. At the site they found the river after some searching, its water rushing cold and clear, and there, near the bank, they found the remains of the battle. The bodies of 2 raiders lay where they had fallen, left to the elements. Of Tarianita there was no sign. Her chest tightened painfully. Samuel knelt, examining the ground. "Tracks head east," he murmured. "A single man. Could be him." Hope flickered faintly in her chest. She knelt by the river bank, touching the damp earth where the fight had raged. She whispered his name softly, "Tarianita," letting the syllables carry on the wind. There was no answer, but she felt as if the land itself held the memory of what he had done. When they returned to the settlement, she felt lighter somehow, though grief still pressed heavy. Weeks turned to months. Winter came, cold and harsh, yet survivable thanks to the settlers' help. She learned to split wood, mend fences, hunt small game, skills her husband had once done for her. She carried on because she had to, because her son needed her to. But she never forgot. Sometimes she would tell the boy stories of his father, how he had been brave and stubborn, how he had loved fiercely, and always she included the story of Tarianita, the man who had once been friend, then enemy, and finally savior. Spring came at last. The prairie bloomed again, wildflowers nodding in the breeze. One day, as she gathered water from the stream, she saw a figure on the far bank. Her breath caught. It was him, older, wearier, but alive. Tarianita stood tall, watching her silently. For a long moment they only stared at one another across the rushing water. Then he raised a hand in greeting, a small nod of acknowledgement. She felt tears sting her eyes as she lifted her own hand and returned. No words passed between them. None were needed. He turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing as quietly as he had come. She stood there for a long time, heart full, and when she returned to the settlement, she carried with her the knowledge that some bonds, those forged in mercy and sacrifice, could outlast even war. Her life would never be what it had been, but it would go on. And in the quiet moments when the wind stirred through the cottonwoods, she felt as if both her husband and Tarianita still walked beside her.
Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe our channel for further stories.